Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm really excited to share my pink wildflowers cropped cardigan with you. So if you haven't already, please click the link in the video description and get your free pattern PDF. The link will take you to my website. Once you're on my website, enter your email in the pink box. The page will redirect right then and there to give you this awesome pattern PDF. So I suggest you print this out and have this handy as you follow along with the video tutorial. For reference, I knit around a size 3, so a lot of the numbers I reference in the video are for a size 3. I design on the fly, so some things might have changed in the final written pattern. So when in doubt, please follow the written pattern instructions. I also have a few other pointers in here, so make sure you have this handy. As far as sizing, so I knit a size 3, which is about a 44.5-inch bust. I am about a 36.5, 37-inch bust. So it does seem like it's a bit oversized, but look, it doesn't look that oversized. It is a bottom-up sweater with a drop shoulder construction. So you need to make sure the sweater is wide enough so that the shoulders drape down on your arms enough so that the armhole depth works. So if I knit this much thinner or not as wide, the shoulder would sit a lot higher up, therefore I would need to make the armhole depth a lot bigger. Okay, I don't want to get into too many details here, but again, it is knit from the bottom up, then you separate the left front and the right front from the back, you knit those pieces separately, then you seam everything up at the top, and then I pick up stitches for the armholes and knit those in the round, okay? So again, I've got step-by-step instructions you can follow along in the video, but please make sure you also print out the pattern PDF. All of the materials and supplies are listed in this pattern PDF and in the text in the video description. I don't go through everything in the video. I just jump right in to starting to make the sweater. So, hope you enjoy, and let's get knitting. I'm going to start by casting on 111 stitches. You're going to want to make sure, I just want to explain why it's an odd number. Basically because of the 1x1 rib on the bottom, you want to make sure you have the same stitch on either side at the end and the beginning. And if you have an even number of stitches, you won't be able to do that. So that's why we have an odd number of stitches. So I'm going to figure out how much I need to cast on by wrapping about 10 stitches, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 stitches around my needle. And now that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110 if I'm doing 111. Totally fine. That'll be way more than enough. So you're going to start by making a slip knot. And then we're going to put that knot on our needle. You're going to make sure you have that tail, that long tail in front of you. And we are going to start by casting on your number of cast on stitches you need. So just reference your pattern. If you're making a size 3, for example, and make sure you look at the third number in the with all of the numbers listed. Okay, so to cast on, you grab the yarn, twist your hand, you go under the yarn around your thumb, over the yarn around your index finger, and pull that through. One more time. Grab the yarn, turn under, over, pull through. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And just wanted to note that I am using my 8mm knitting needle here for the ribbing. I like my ribbing to be a little bit tighter. So I go down and needle size. The rest of the sweater will be knit in 9mm needles. So you're going to continue casting on until you have your total number of cast on stitches that you're supposed to have. Okay, so I've got my 111 stitches cast on here, and now I'm going to turn the work. We're going to be working back across the stitches, and we're simply going to do a 1x1 rib. And because we have an odd number of stitches. If we start with a knit 1, purl 1, we're going to end with a knit 1. So you just start knitting 1, bring the yarn in front, and then purl 1. Bring the yarn in back, knit 1, forward, purl 1. And you continue this all of the way across. Knit 1, purl 1 until you get to the last stitch, and then you will knit 1. Okay, I am nearing the end of my first knit 1, purl 1 row here. And one thing I do want to mention, this is the wrong side of the work, and this is the right side of the work. You can kind of see the difference. So I have a purl 1, and then my last stitch will be a knit 1. So when I turn it over, my first stitch on the right side of the work is a purl stitch, you can tell. So when you're knitting on this side, it's a knit stitch, you turn it, and the first stitch is a purl stitch. So on the right side of the work for our second row, we will start with a purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, and then your last stitch should be a purl stitch. So you do a purl 1, knit 1, all the way to 1 stitch before the end, and then you will purl 1. And then when you flip the work, you'll go back to a wrong side row, which is you starting knit 1, purl 1. Okay, so you are going to continue this ribbing for about 3 inches. So I will check back with you after you've completed this ribbing for about 3 inches. I usually kind of design on the fly, so I think it's going to be about 3 inches, but I will confirm with you as I keep going and see what this whole thing starts to look like. Okay, I'm finishing up my 1x1 rib, and I'm going to end after I hit about 3 inches of ribbing, and we are going to end after we finish a wrong side row. And you can see that I'm on a wrong side row right now based on what it's looking like. That's the right side, and that's the wrong side. So I'm going to finish this up and we'll do a quick measurement. And just to note, I like to say what the length is instead of the number of rows, because you could be working on my pattern in worsted weight, and also want to say everybody's gauge is different with length too. So I'll show you. We're just at about 3 inches now, and I have just finished a wrong side row, so I'm going to turn the work. We'll be facing the right side now, and you can just tell the bottom looks like that instead of like that. So we're on the right side, and now we've been doing the ribbing with our 8mm needles. Now we're going to switch to the 9mm needles. So I usually just start knitting. We're just going to knit stockinette stitch now, and you're just going to transfer the stitches from the 8mm to the 9mm simply by knitting them off of this needle. And you just start knitting. So we're going to be completing stockinette stitch, and just follow what your pattern says for the size that you're making for how long you should complete stockinette stitch for, and based on how long you want your cardigan to be underneath the underarm, from the underarm to the cast on edge. So if you want a more cropped look, go shorter. If you want it to be a little longer, you can go as long as you would like. On my on the version I have made with thinner yarn on 6mm needles, I made that version very cropped, and I think it was about 9 inches from the cast on edge. Here, I'll show you. So I'm doing the tutorial, as you know, on 9mm needles, but this is my version on 6mm needles, and this is very cropped. And this was 10 inches from the underarm. I'm sorry, not 9, 10 inches. And again, this is very cropped. You're gonna wanna figure out how long overall you want your, you want it to be from the top, from where the neck is, all the way down to the bottom. It's about 18 inches on this one. And my armhole is about 8 inches here. So just keep in mind, we'll just do some math and figure out how long you want yours to be. You can take another sweater and measure how long from the top of the shoulder around the neckline down, you know, another sweater or cardigan is that you like, so you can gauge how long to make your sweater from the underarm. But anyway, I'm probably gonna make this one about 12 or 13 inches from the underarm, just so this one fits me a little bit longer than the cropped one. So when we knit stockinette stitch, we knit on the right side and we purl on the wrong side. So that will give us stockinette stitch when we're knitting flat. We're knitting back and forth on circular needles. So we are knitting flat. And to do stockinette, you need to knit on the right side and purl on the wrong side. So I am still transferring all the stitches from the 8mm needle to the 9mm needles here. And I'm just working all the way across. So continue on, I'll meet you back here at the end. All right, I'm nearing the end here of this row, of this first stockinette stitch row. And I am continuing to move the stitches onto the 9mm needle. I'm done with the 8mm now, so I'm just gonna put that aside, and I'm gonna flip the work now. And now I am on the wrong side of the work, so I'm gonna purl. So you simply just start purling all of the way across. All right, so knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side, and complete stockinette stitch for the length called for in your pattern or the length you would like to knit this to. I am going to meet you back here when I've gotten to my desired length. Okay, so now I have completed stockinette stitch so that my whole piece from the cast on edge to the top of the work is 12 inches long. All right, so that's how long I want this version to be from the underarm down. Like I said, this version is going to be slightly longer than the version that I knit on 6mm needles with petite wool. That one is 10 inches, so that is pretty cropped. So just use your judgment and figure out how long you would like it. The patterns are guides, but you can customize this to be however long you want underneath the underarm. All right, so you're gonna wanna finish after a wrong side row, so after you've completed a purl row, and now you're facing the right side of the work, okay? Now it's time to just work on the left front. And it's the left front because once you wear it, if this is the cardigan as if you were wearing it, I'm sorry, we're going to be working on the right front because if you were wearing the cardigan, it would be the part that is on your right side. So whenever you hear a left front or right front, it is referring to the work as if you were wearing it, not as if you were looking at it far away. Okay, so we are going to be working on the right front. So just to tell you what I'm just going to give you a little overview what we're going to do. We're going to knit across the right front a certain amount of stitches, and then we're going to place the rest of the work on scrap yarn so we can just work back and forth on this right front. And basically this is where we divide the work up in the fronts and the back so we create an armhole. when we work back and forth on the right front, then we'll work back and forth on the back, then we'll work back and forth on the left front, and we have to work those in individual pieces. So we are going to start by, with this size that I'm knitting, just refer to your pattern. We're going to knit across 23 stitches. So I will have 23 stitches for my fronts here. Okay, so we're going to knit across 23 stitches, and then we're going to put the rest of the work on a piece of waste yarn. So I will meet you back here once I have knit 23 stitches. Alright, so I've put my right front stitches onto, well, I've knit across my right front stitches, and now I'm going to pause. I'm going to take my waste yarn that is substantially longer than the stitches left on the needle, and I'm going to thread it through my tapestry needle, and now I'm simply going to move the rest of the stitches that are on that left needle onto this waste yarn. And you simply do that. Make sure you're going into the yarn this way, as if to purl. It's easier to just slip the needle back on later if it's in this direction. So you're going to just move all of these stitches off, push them onto the waste yarn. Okay, I'm just finishing getting the rest of the stitches on this piece of waste yarn. And I just want to go back and clarify. I think I was saying 23 stitches. It should be 28, just so you know it's 28 stitches for the size that I am knitting. Again, I'm designing on the fly, and sometimes I miscalculate, but again, just follow the written pattern for your size, so you know how many stitches to knit across. Okay, so I'm pulling off my tapestry needle. I'm just going to kind of spread these stitches out evenly across here, and now I have my needle just on the stitches for that right front. Okay, and again, like I said, that was 28 stitches for the size that I am knitting. Okay, so now we're gonna work back and forth on stockinette stitch for about 6 inches for the size that I'm making. So now I'm just going to work back and forth. I'm on the wrong side now, so I'm gonna be purling. And I'll check back in with you once I have about 6 inches knit in stockinette stitch, and then I'll show you how to shape the neckline. So basically, you're knitting stockinette stitch until it's time to shape that neckline for the collar. And we will also be working the dropped shoulder, which means the shoulder is bound off at an angle so that it is angled down a little bit. So I'll show you what I mean in a little bit. In the meantime, I will meet you back here once I have completed stockinette stitch for 6 inches. All right, so changing what I just said a little bit, I continued until I had 5 inches instead of 6 inches for that stockinette stitch when I first started that right front. So just follow what the pattern says. Again, I kind of design on the fly here. So this is where our armhole will be, and so this is kind of where that neckline starts. So we're gonna bind off some stitches here for the part of the neckline. Again, reference what your pattern says, and then we are going to do some decrease rows and also bind off at an angle. All right, so in this case, we are going to bind off 8 stitches at the beginning of this row. And because we need the bind off to be in this location, again, this is the armhole, this is where that neckline is, we have to bind off here on the right side. And then when we do this on the other side, we'll be binding off on the wrong side. All right, so to bind off 8 stitches, or however many stitches you need to bind off, knit 2, and then you're gonna lift that first stitch over the second stitch. So we just bound off 1 stitch. Knit another stitch, bind off. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So bind off however many stitches. That was 8 stitches in my case, and you can go back and check here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now we're just going to knit to the end. Okay, so I will meet you back here when I've knit to the end here. Okay, so I've knit the last stitch. I'm going to turn my work, and now I'm just simply going to purl all the way back. All right, I've purled the last stitch. I'm going to turn my work. Now you can see this is where we bound off previously, okay? And now we're going to decrease a stitch. And we're going to kind of shape the neckline to be angled up a little bit. So it's flat and then it's going to be angled up. In order to decrease, we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to do a slip, slip, knit. And that angles the stitch to the left. So it'll follow the neckline up, and then we're gonna just knit to the end and purl back again. So knit to the end and then purl back, and then I'll show you how to do that decrease again. So follow what the directions say for how many decreases you need to do for your size, in whatever weight of yarn and whatever needle size you are using. You just turn and purl back again, and then I'll show you how to do that decrease again. All right, so finished purling. I'm going to turn, and then I'm going to do that knit 1, slip, slip, knit again. And you can see now the work is kind of starting to angle a little bit that way. So you knit 1, slip, slip, knit those 2 stitches together. And then you knit to the end. All right, so you're going to continue this decrease row on the right side, followed by the purl side, the purl row. I'm doing this 2 more times. So just reference what your pattern calls for. And you can check your stitch count. You're supposed to end up with a certain number of stitches after a certain number of decreases. So I have done 2 decreases. I'm going to do 2 more decreases. So I bound off 8 stitches, and then I'm doing 4 more decreases. So I will have decreased a total of 12 stitches. So I should, if I started with 28 and I decreased 12, I should have 16 stitches left when I'm done doing all of my decreases. Show you the decrease one more time. Knit 1, slip, slip, knit those 2 stitches together. And now you can really see how the work is angled that way. We'll be picking up stitches, and I'd like to explain why we do the knit 1, then the decrease. That extra stitch here allows us to pick up stitches around the neckline and then still have this nice edge. So you'll be picking up stitches around that first stitch, and then you'll be able to see that decrease, so it looks pretty nice. Knit to end, purl back, and then I should have 1 more decrease row to do. So I will see you back here when I've finished my decreases and I am ready to bind off for the shoulder seam there. Okay, I've bound off. Again, I design on the fly. I've bound off 1, 2, 3. I'm supposed to do a 4th. I'm looking at how deep my neckline is already, and I am going to do a slip knit to the end, and then I'm going to bind off. So I will have a total of 4 stitches, 4 decreases on the slant here. I'll show you what I'm going to do. All right, so I'm going to do my last decrease, slip knit here, and I'm going to knit to the end. And then when I turn the work, I'm going to bind off half of the stitches here. And this creates kind of a drop shoulder. So we're going to bind off half, purl to the end, knit back, purl to the end, okay? And then bind off on the right side. So we're going to turn the work, and I'm going to bind off half of my stitches here, which I believe should be 7, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. I'm sorry, it should be 8. That's right. So I have 16 stitches left, so I'm going to bind off half of these stitches. So that's 8. So I'm binding off on the wrong side here because I need to bind off at the armhole first. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches I've bound off now, okay? So I'm going to purl to the end. I'm going to turn the work. I'm going to now knit to the end. And now I'm going to bind off the rest of the stitches here on the wrong side. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm off there a little bit. Oh, it's because you have 1 extra stitch. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you just bind off the rest of the stitches. And so you can see now the shoulder's at a bit of an angle. And then when you sew it all together, you won't see that step. You won't see that ridge. But it's at an angle, which creates a nice drop shoulder. So you have finished that right front now. And now we are going to work the back. I have 55 stitches I need to pick up for the back. So what I'm going to do is take my circular needles and I am going to pick up 55 stitches off of my waste yarn for that back. So look at your pattern, figure out how many stitches your size calls for to pick up for the back, and get those back on the needle. So I'll see you back here when I have these 55 stitches on. You can pull the waste yarn as you go or kind of take it all out at the end, but get all of those back stitches back on your needle. Okay, so I've got 55 stitches back on my needle. I need to pull this waste yarn out, but I need to make sure that the waste yarn stays on to still hold the stitches for the left front, because we'll come back and work that later. So now we have our stitches on for the back. We just put the stitches back on. I'm gonna slide my needle over to this side so I can join my yarn on the right side and start working stockinette stitch for the length that your pattern suggests. Okay, so I am going to join the yarn on the right side, which just means I take my yarn and I start knitting. All right, I'm gonna turn this over here. It starts to get a little big. All right, so you take your yarn and you simply start knitting. It's a little loose at first, but you can kind of hold it with your right hand and you continue knitting, and then it'll tighten up and you'll just weave in that end later. So now you're just going to continue stockinette stitch, knitting on the right side, purling on the wrong side until the length that your pattern says to knit. So I'm going to go about 7 inches or so. So I will meet you back here after you knit the length that you need to knit before it's time to bind off. And we have to bind off at an angle on both sides to accommodate the angle for both of the shoulders. So the back will have an angle up this way and then it'll be straight across. And then the left front and the right front will match up with the angles that we've created on the back. All right, so I will see you back here in a little bit. Okay, so I've continued stockinette stitch for my back to about the point where I need to bind off. It should almost line up with that right front. And you want to end after a wrong side row, so you're facing the right side. And just to explain what we're going to do basically is we're going to bind off stitches here, then we're going to knit all the way across, bind off stitches on the wrong side here, knit back, bind off more stitches here, knit to the end, bind off stitches on the wrong side, purl back, and then bind off on the right side. So that's just an overview of what we're doing, and the goal is binding off like that. The strategy is you're binding off so this work angles down this way to match the right front. You're going to bind off at a slight angle so it matches the left front here, and that's kind of what a drop shoulder does. It just helps the work to fit a little bit better. So you have a larger armhole gap closer to your neck, and I get smaller down your shoulder. So that's just a little bit of an explanation. So we need to match what we did with that right front. So we're going to start by binding off 8 stitches because our shoulder on the right front was 16 stitches. So I'm going to start by binding off 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I've got my 8 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm just going to knit to the end. I can't bind off on this side until I'm on the wrong side of the work, so I just need to knit to the end. All right, I'm at the end. I'm going to turn the work. Now I'm going to bind off stitches on the wrong side of the work. So we're going to bind off 8 stitches on the wrong side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and now we are going to just purl to the end. All right, I'm going to turn the work. Now I'm back on the right side. I'm going to bind off 8 more stitches again. And just note, if you're working in a smaller gauge, so with thinner yarn and smaller needles, you might have to go back and forth. The steps might be a little bit more. When you work with thicker yarn and bigger needles, you don't have to do as many rows to get the same effect. So I think on the version I knit with 6mm needles, you go back and forth one more time. Instead of breaking off the bind off into 2 sections, it's 3. So it's a little bit more back and forth, but the overall concept still applies. Okay, so now I'm going to bind off 8 stitches again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now knit to the end. Flip the work. Now we're going to bind off 8 on the wrong side. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now just purl to the end. Turn the work. And now we're just going to bind off the back of the neck stitches. So you're simply just going to bind off this whole row. When you get to the last stitch, you can cut a tail. Pull the yarn through gently, and now you've completed the back. I'll just show you what it looks like. You can see how it angles. So now the work is angled down for the right front. We have a straight back here, and then it angles down for the left front. And then, as you can see, our right front and the back now will line up and have the same angle. Okay, so now it's time to work on the left front, which is still on this waste yarn. So I'm gonna pick this up, by just pulling my 9mm circular needle back through the stitches that this waste yarn is holding up. So just work all the way across. You can start to pull the waste yarn out as you go, or you can pull it all out at the end, whatever you feel comfortable doing. So just make sure you get these stitches back on your needles. Okay, so I've got my stitches back on, and I picked them up this way, but we're gonna start on the right side where that armpit is. So I need to slide my needle back through so I can start right here. If this is the back, this is where the armhole is. So we're gonna start on the right side at that underarm. So again, to start and join the yarn, you simply just take your yarn and you start knitting with it. And again, it will probably be a little loose, and you can just hold that yarn and pull it. Don't drop the stitch like I just did. But yeah, you can just keep that kind of taut. And then you're gonna be knitting to that same length you did on the other side. For me, it's about 5 inches. So this is just stockinette stitch, knitting on the right side, purling on the wrong side, until you get to that length that you need before you start working that neckline. And again, for me, that's about 5 inches. So just do the same thing that you did with that right front. So I'll meet you back here when it's time to shape that left front neckline after I've completed stockinette stitch for 5 inches. And then I also just wanted to show you too, again, what it looks like. The work is pretty big. So, you know, to flip the work, I just kind of work back and forth with this one side, with the rest of the work just kind of laying nicely over there. So again, now we're just purling on the wrong side. Okay, so I've completed stockinette for 5 inches, which is what my pattern calls for before it's time to begin the neckline. And remember now, so we are on the left front, we're working over here. We've completed the right front already, and here is our neckline. So we need to mirror what we're doing on this right front on the left front. So we bound off on the right side here, we need to bind off on the wrong side here. So we're going to bind off the same amount of stitches, but then do the decreases and bind off backwards from what we did the other side so it matches nicely. All right, so in order to do that, and again, I just like to explain the overall concept of how we're constructing the sweater, just to help you see the big picture instead of you just blindly following patterns or following instructions. When you kind of have the big picture, it helps you understand what you're doing. It's easier to get it if you ever want to design your own patterns or modify this. It's good to understand how things are made. All right, so I'm going to bind off those 8 stitches. 1, 2, I'm sorry, that's 1. So I'm binding off on the wrong side, so I'm purling as I'm binding off here. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now we're just going to purl to the end and knit back. We're going to knit all the way to the end. Okay, So now we're going to turn the work, but now we're going to start those decreases. So we did the decreases on the right side, on the other side. Now we're going to do the decreases on the wrong side to kind of mirror what we did. So in order to do those decreases, we're going to purl 1 and then purl 2 together. I'm just checking to make sure I have my slant going the right way. Yes. So it's purl 1, purl 2 together, purl to the end. Okay, then you're going to knit back and repeat the purl 1, purl 2 together. And you're going to repeat that the number of times you did on the other side. So for me, I'll have a total of 4 decreases on this angle. Turn the work, purl back. So I will see you back here. You know what, let me show you one more time how to do that decrease on the wrong side of the work here. Okay, so you can see now that the decrease is slanting. We're working this way to shape the neckline this way. So we want that decrease to be angled that way. So we successfully do that by purling 2 together. So turn the work, purl 1, purl 2 together. So you put your needle into both of those stitches and purl. So now you've just decreased a stitch again. Purl to the end. I've knit back. So I've completed 3 purl 2 togethers, 3 decreases. I need to do 4, but I just want to show you how to count. You can see there, that's 1 right there. That's 2. You can see the 2 stitches kind of coming together. That's 3. So I know I need to do 1 more. So I'm going to do 1 more, purl 1, purl 2 together across, but then I'm going to start binding off. So let's do that. Okay, so turn the work. You're going to complete your last decrease. Purl 1, purl 2 together, purl to the end. Okay, so now we're going to flip the work. And again, we've got our nice neckline here, and our shoulder seam will kind of angle down a little bit this way. So in order to do that, we have to bind off half the stitches on this side first. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 stitches, which is correct for my pattern. And I'm going to bind off half of these stitches, so that's binding off 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can always check to make sure you have 8 stitches left, 2, 4, 6, 7, and then don't forget that this stitch counts as 8. So now we're going to just knit to the end. Turn the work, purl back. You always continue binding off on the same side you started binding off on. Okay, so purl back, and then now we're going to bind off those remaining stitches, those remaining 8 stitches. And this one I'm gonna cut so it's long enough to weave back and seam up the shoulders. So I'm gonna make that one a little longer because we can line up the work and seam the shoulders with this. Okay, actually no, we can't. We always wanna start on the end and work it. Never mind. You can snip that a little bit shorter. Okay, so you have finished the left front, the right front, and the back. And now you've got this big sweater going on here. So now we're gonna seam the shoulders. So you can fold the work together and we can start seaming the shoulders. When you seam, you always wanna start from the outside of the work and work in. And I am going to start by grabbing my tapestry needle and cutting some yarn long enough to seam those shoulders. I'm going to thread my needle here and I'm going to start with the left just because it's here. And we're gonna start on the outside and work our way around. I am probably gonna flip this here so you can see. And so we start with the outside and work our way in. If you start on the inside, you have to really make sure you're lining up your stitches correctly. This is just a little bit more error-proof here. Okay, so you can see now that you're gonna wanna line up where you bound off. So this should line up, I know we're looking at it a little upside down, but you're gonna line up those shoulders as best as you can, and then you're gonna start seaming. Okay, so to seam, just to give a little bit of background on seaming, we're going to go through the V's on one side and the V's on the other side. So the stitches line up. Okay, so I usually start by just kind of connecting the work on the very last bar. And I pull through and leave a little bit of a tail because we'll want to weave that in later. Okay, so we're gonna find that first V. And the V needs to be facing this way on this side. See the V here? It's like upside down V. Okay, so we're gonna go through the V on this side, the upside down V there. Pull through, and again, don't pull through too tight because we have this kind of hanging still. And then the V that is facing the right side here. It's not upside down. Okay, so the V here, upside down V, and the V that's facing right side here. Upside down V. And then, you know, as you get to that spot where it changes, just do your best to make sure that's all lined up. Try to zoom in here so you can see a little bit better. Okay. Upside down V. Right side up V. And you can tell now, when you do it this way, it looks invisible. As invisible. You will get a little bit of You'll get a little bit of a bump here because you are seaming, so it is thick, but that's okay. So just continue going through the V's and lining up the shoulders as best as you can. Okay, here's where it jumps a little bit. And just do your best. You still go into those V's. It might be a little harder to see. That's where I came out. This is right where it changes here. And I'm gonna make sure I go into the right one, so it'll jump a little bit. Okay, I'm almost finished here. Unfortunately, you'll have a lot of ends to weave in on this sweater because we're seaming and we've joined so much. Okay, so I'm nearing the end here. I'm gonna go in and kind of go in the end here one last time. And I like to end by going into the back. Okay. So we've seamed up our one shoulder, and you can tell now it kind of drops down to one side. Okay, so then now you're going to want to do the same thing and seam up the other side. So line up your work, start on the outside, and seam up. Okay, so now we've got our shoulder seamed, and now we're going to do the collar. I think this is a good time to do the collar. And then we'll do the sleeves after. So basically, I'm going to try to pick up about 50 stitches. You know, you're going to have to kind of space things out and kind of figure it out as you go along here. I've gone down a needle size. I'm using 8mm needles here. So when you are working on the horizontal, which means when you're picking up stitches and you're working in the same direction, you're going to pick up a stitch for every stitch here. When you start working on the vertical, when you're going the opposite direction of the stitches, we're going to pick up 2 stitches, and we're going to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. I'll show you what I mean. And then we'll pick up a stitch for each stitch across the back. When we're working down this side, we're going to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows here, and then a stitch for every stitch working in the same direction as the work. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go into my first stitch. This is called picking up and knitting. When you pick up a stitch, we're going to go through both of those bars and pick up. So we picked up and we've knit a stitch there. 1. You just go into the next V there and you pull up this way. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I bound off 8 stitches, so I'm going to pick up 8 stitches here. That's how that lines up. So pick up stitches for how many stitches you bound off there. Okay. Now working up the side, we're going to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So that looks like this. 1, 2, skip a stitch, 3. Okay. 1, 2, skip a stitch, 3. I'm gonna do, I know I only want to pick up around 15 stitches here on this side, and I'm gonna try to do 30 stitches. If you want more stitches and have your collar be a little bigger, that's fine. This is not an exact science. I'm gonna see how many stitches I end up with here. So now we're gonna pick up a stitch for every stitch along the back. And you might need to redo this, right? Like you might pick up these stitches and figure out you have too many or not enough. It's not quite the easiest thing to do. I usually like to give a range, like in my patterns, because everybody picks up stitches a little differently. So if you have another stitch or two, it's not the end of the world. I do like to go down in needle size, just to make the neck a little, the collar a little more tailored. So I'm just working my way across here. But if I picked up 15 stitches here, I'm going to make sure I pick up 15 stitches along that left front. Start working down this side. One, two, skip a stitch, three. We're at the bottom here, and now I'm gonna go in every stitch here. Okay, so I've picked up my stitches. Now we're simply gonna knit stockinette stitch for twice as long as you want the collar to be. So on my 6mm version, I knit for 8 inches. I think on this bulkier version, I'm gonna go a little bit longer and knit for closer to 10 inches. So when I fold it in half, it'll be about 5 inches high. And then on the thinner version, on the 6mm version, if I knit it to 8 inches, it's 4 inches high when I fold it. So I'm just gonna kind of see how it's looking. But so basically now you're just going to do stockinette stitch. So you picked all those stitches up, you're gonna turn the work and just purl, because now we're on the wrong side of the work. So you're just gonna do stockinette stitch where you purl on the wrong side, knit on the right side until you get to your twice the length of your collar, because again, you're going to fold this in half, and then we're going to fold the collar over. Okay, I'll see you back here after you've completed stockinette stitch for your collar. Okay, so I've completed stockinette stitch. I ended up going about 9 inches for the collar, but just take a look, see if you like the length when you fold it over to where you picked up the stitch, and see if you're liking the length. So basically what we're gonna do is we are going to pick up a stitch at the bottom where we've casted on, or where we picked up and knit for the beginning of the collar. We're going to go to the bottom, and we're lining up each stitch where we picked it up. We're going to knit these two together to seam it, but then we're also going to bind off as we go. So again, we're working, you can see that there's kind of like a V here, V, 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 and we're going to be going into, let me make sure, this is in focus for you guys so you can see. We're going to be going into the back loop here as we go. All right. Okay. So put your left hand needle into that outside bar of that V for the very first stitch. Make sure you're working with the yarn and not a random tail. As you start to get tails everywhere, sometimes you can start working with the wrong piece of yarn. Okay, so you're going to knit those 2 stitches together. Okay, and then we're going to pick up, see, I've got a tail here, just make sure you're keeping that out of the way. Then you're going to go back to where you were. See those V's back there. and you're going to insert your needle again into the next stitch in that outside V. And you're going to knit 2 together again. And you're going to then bind off. So go into that next V, knit 2 together, and bind off. So you're going to continue, and I'm going to try to zoom in here so you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing here. Okay, so we're going to find that V, go into it there, knit 2 together, and bind off. Go into that V, knit 2 together, and bind off. So it starts to look like this here. I'll show you one more time. So you can tell I've just worked in that stitch, so I need to go to the next V, which is right there. I'm going to slip my needle in. I'm going to knit 2 together here. And bind off. So we're seaming and binding off as we go. And one of the trickiest things is to make sure you're lining up your stitches as best as you can as you go. So I'm going to continue this, picking up that stitch, knitting 2 together and binding off until I get all the way to the end. So I will see you when I get there, but again, just be careful doing your best to line up the stitches as you work across. That's the hardest thing. All right, so I am knitting the last 2 stitches together here. I'm gonna bind off the last stitch. I'm going to cut a tail and pull this through, and now I have seamed up that double collar. So now we have our collar done, and now we're going to work on the sleeves. I just wanted to show you what the sweater is looking like now. So we've got the collar finished, and we've got our sleeves here. Okay, now it's time to pick up stitches for the sleeves. And it doesn't matter which sleeve you start with. I'm going to start with the right sleeve. But regardless, you're going to start by picking up stitches at the bottom of the armhole, and you're going to want to try to pick up the same amount of stitches on each side. So I'm going to pick up a total of 36 stitches for this size and this yarn weight and needle size. I'm using 9mm 16-inch needles to knit the sleeves. What you're going to want to do is take your tail, and we are going to pick up, again, we're going to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. And the reason you do that is if you went into a stitch, when you're knitting opposite direction, you want to skip some stitches so the work lays flat. You'll have too many stitches if you go into every stitch. Okay, so to start here, we're going to go and pick up our stitches. And we're going to go 1, 2, skip a stitch here, 3, 4, 5, skip a stitch, 6, 7, 7, 8, skip a stitch, 9, 10, 11, skip a stitch, 12, 13, 14, skip a stitch, 15, 16, 17, skip a stitch, 18. So I'm about at the top now, so that's good. And you know, I just want to say again, everybody picks up stitches a little differently. I've just specified an armhole depth. I haven't specified how many rows to knit, right? So you might have to space things out evenly. If you want to add a few more stitches, if you need to add a few more stitches for the sleeves, that's fine. Just know that when we then reduce stitches as we go along the sleeve, for the sleeve cuff, you might have to adjust if you want your end cuff to have the same number of stitches as the pattern calls for. I know that's a little confusing, but again, people's length for their armhole depth might have a different number of rows. So you might have to skip a few more rows or just spread things out a little more evenly or differently to get that stitch count you need. If you are way off, if for some reason your armhole has a lot more depth, if you've gotten to this point, instead of ripping back, you could just pick up stitches higher up and then seam up here. That's just another way to kind of fix as you go. So you're going to continue picking up stitches along the other side just as we did, and then I'll show you what to do to join the stitches in the round. Okay, so I've cast on 38 stitches here. I'm going to actually cast on one more stitch, and then to join in the round, I'm going to slip that first stitch over to the right hand needle, slip that extra stitch over and drop it. And that's what kind of connects the round, okay? And now I am going to place a stitch marker. And now we're just going to knit stockinette stitch for about 1.5 inches. And now we're just knitting in the round here. So knitting in the round stockinette is just knitting every round, okay? So you knit all the way across to that stitch marker, you slip the stitch marker, and then you keep knitting. So I am going to meet you back here once I've knit about 1.5 inches in stockinette stitch, and then I'll show you how to do a decrease round. So I'm going to do a gradual decrease. You do not have to do this if you don't want decreased sleeves decreased. And what this just means is that the sleeve gradually gets thinner as we get towards the cuff. If you wanted to just do a series of decreases right before the cuff, you could do that. You have lots of flexibility. So I am just working my way around here in stockinette stitch just to show you what it looks like to knit in the round. And looks like this. So I am nearing that beginning of round here. You can see my stitch marker here. And I'm pulling that tail just to keep things tight. All right, so I'm nearing that beginning, and you simply just slip the marker and continue knitting. And you can pull, and we can go back and weave in these ends and kind of seam up any gaps you might have. But that's how you simply knit in the round. It can be a little tight on the 16-inch circular needles. It can be a little difficult. You could do this using the magic loop method with longer circular needles if you would like. You can use double pointed needles if you know how to do that. I like to knit my sleeves on 16-inch circulars. Okay, so we're gonna continue stockinette stitch in the round for the sleeve, and I am playing around with the decreases, but I think I'm gonna do a decrease about every 2.5 inches or so. So I'm approaching a decrease round here, and I just wanted to show you how to do that. So you knit past the marker, and once you hit the marker, you knit one, and then you knit 2 stitches together, okay? And then you're gonna knit all the way around, and when you get to 3 stitches to the end, you're gonna do a slip, slip, knit, knit 1. Okay, I am 3 stitches to the end. I am going to do a slip, slip, knit 2 together here. So I've just decreased another stitch, and then I'm gonna knit 1, slip the marker, and now I can continue the stockinette stitch. So we just decreased 2 stitches on this decrease round. And, you know, as you know, I'm designing on the fly. I think 2.5 inches to decrease every 2.5 inches is probably gonna work, but just reference the pattern to figure out how long you should go in between your decreases, or you can just knit the sleeve straight and do a decrease round to get the number of stitches you need to do the cuff. But I'll see you back here as I continue the decreases, and I'll let you know how it's going. Okay, so now I'm at the point where I am going to knit the cuff, and I have knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decreases, so that's 10 stitches I decreased. I am at about 14 inches or so, and I know the cuff will add about another 4 inches, so if you need more length, whatever, make sure you account for that. I would just continue stockinette stitch, and then just make sure you account for 4 inches for the cuff. Okay, so I am going to switch to 8mm 16-inch needles to knit the cuff. And in order to do that, I am just going to simply knit around and knit all of these stitches off of my 9mm needle to get it onto my 8mm needle, and then I will begin a 1x1 rib. So I'm going to continue around, and I started with the second to last stitch just so my stitch marker wasn't flying around. That's the only reason why I did that. So you just work your way around, knitting the stitches off of the 9mm onto the 8mm. All right, I'm almost done knitting around here. And then I dropped the 9mm. And now I'm going to do a 1x1 rib for the cuff. And I'm using a smaller needle, so I'm just making sure I'm slipping the marker. Okay, so once I slip the marker, I'm just gonna do a knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. And you continue this knit 1, purl 1 for 4 inches. So just continue this around, and when you get to the beginning of round marker, you just start the knit 1 and the purl 1 again. Okay. So I'll see you back here when I've knit about 4 inches of this 1x1 rib, and then I'll just show you how to bind off. Okay, so I've completed the ribbing for 4 inches. It was a little tight on my 16-inch circular needle, but I made it work. So if you want to use DPNs, you know, feel free to do that, or the magic loop method with longer needles. But anyway, now I'm going to bind off in the 1x1 rib. So I am going to, you can keep the marker on just to help you keep it straight if you would like, but you knit 1, purl 1, and then you're gonna bind off. So you keep knitting in the established pattern, knit 1, but you bind off along the way. And purl 1, bind off. Knit one, bind off, purl one, bind off, knit one, bind off, purl one, bind off. Okay, so continue around, and then when you get to the last stitch, I'll show you what to do. Okay, I've got 2 stitches left here. I'm going to bind off that last stitch. I am going to cut the work, and I can grab my scissors easily, and then you just pull it through, and then we'll go back in with a tapestry needle and connect the beginning and the end to make that look a little bit more seamless there. All right, so we have a sleeve done, one sleeve done. You're going to repeat what you did with your first sleeve on the left side. So if you made any modifications, make sure you make those same modifications on the other side. But right now I'm going to show you how to do the applied I-cord edging. Okay, so you can do the other sleeve and then do this edging. You can do the edging now, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to take my 8mm 16-inch needle again, and I am going to do an applied I-cord. There's a couple different ways you can do this. This is how I do it. So what you're gonna do is you are gonna cast on 3 stitches onto your circular needle. So you make a slip knot, that counts as the first stitch, and you're gonna cast on 2 more stitches. So we have 3 stitches on the needle now. We are going to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So that means 1, 2, skip a stitch 3, 4, 5, skip a stitch 6, and so on. All right, this is a little laborious, but it is really worth it. It creates a really nice finish when we pick up stitches. So basically, I'm creating a nice edge here, and this will also seam up that double collar. So we're gonna start on the bottom here, on the bottom right, and you're always going to want to start the work so the right side of the work is facing you. So when you do the other side, you're going to be starting at the top. Okay, so we're going to pick up our first stitch here, and you're going to go in that last stitch. So see the V's there? And you're going to go in 3 stitches for every 4 rows. So start by making sure your yarn is in the back. Insert the needle into this first stitch here. You're gonna go from the bottom up around the needle so the yarn is facing in that direction. Okay, so we've picked up our first stitch. Now we're gonna slide the work to the other side. Ha ha ha. Now we are going to knit 2. 1, 2, and then we're going to knit 2 together kind of through this back loop here like this. Okay? Now we're going to go into the next stitch, slide the work. We picked up that stitch. We're going to slide the work. We're going to knit 2. And then knit 2 together. So we're connecting this I-cord to our work as we go. So we knit 2 stitches. Now we're going to skip a stitch. So we're skipping this stitch, and we're going to go into the next stitch there. Pick that up and knit it. So now we always have 4 stitches on. Slide the work to the other side. Knit 2 together. Knit 2, knit 2 together. Okay, so we've done 3, so now we need to go into the next stitch. That's 1. 2, go into that next stitch. And skip a stitch now. So we went into this one, we're going to skip this one, we're going to go into the next one. Pick that up and work that. And now I'll show you what this is looking like when we are done with this stitch. So it's pretty time consuming, but it creates a really cool edge. And now you can see we've got this kind of this thick braided looking edge here. It looks really cool. So the point of going down a needle size and skipping some rows basically just helps to make sure the work is, as we're working in this direction, the length isn't being compromised, right? We don't want it to get stretched out and we don't want it to be pulled together too tight. So check and see if it looks like your work is getting like scrunched together or if it's stretched out too much. You can go up a needle size, go down a needle size. You can change your frequency for skipping a row if you need to. But going down a needle size and working at 3 stitches for every 4 rows seems to work out well for me. So just wanted to explain that. Okay, so you're gonna go all the way up this side. And then once you get to this double collar, you're gonna treat it the same way. You're gonna go through both sides and pick up the stitch on both sides. So I'll show you that once I get there. But that's what the work is looking like right now. Okay, now I wanna show you what to do when you get up to the collar. So it's important to make sure you're picking up through both sides of this because we're actually seaming up this side here as we go. So you just want to make sure you insert your needle through the front and the back. And you're just going to pick up a stitch this way. It can be a little difficult, but I got it there. And then again, you just continue working as you have been, working 3 stitches for every 4 rows. And then I'll show you what to do when you get to the end. You're gonna wanna stop when you're like 1 row from the end because we wanna leave room for the bind off and to weave that in. So I'm gonna finish working my way up and then I'm gonna stop, instead of trying to go in through the very last stitch, I'm gonna stop like right here because we'll have a little bit of a tail from our bind off and we want it to kind of line up with the top. Okay, so I'll see you back here then. Okay, I'm almost to the end here. I'm going to pick up 1 more stitch and I am then going to bind off. So I'm going to complete this. 1, 2, knit 2 together. And then now I'm going to bind off by sliding the work to the other side here. And I've got 3 stitches left, so I'm just going to work these and bind off as I go. 1, 2, bind off. And then knit the next stitch, bind off. So as you can see then, we're going to have to weave in the end. So cut this. Pull it through, kind of pull the yarn here. And then the best thing to do I never have all my supplies handy. The best thing to do, I like to right at this time just kind of weave in this end. I literally just insert this, and what's great about the double collar is that you can basically just kind of leave the tails on the inside. So I'll pull it through here and then see how it's coming out the back. I'll pull it a little bit and then snip it, and then it'll just kind of fall into the inside, and then we just finished that. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so you're gonna want to do that applied I-cord on this side now, but you need to start at the collar and work your way down. So you'll start by inserting and working through the front and the back. And you'll work your way down and bind off down here. Okay, I just want to show you quickly how to weave in the ends for the cuff here. Now that I finished both sleeves, and you are going to want to basically thread your needle with the tail that's still there. And I like to kind of go back through like this, and then back through on the other side, and it looks like you've continued the stitch that way. And then to weave it in, I typically just go up one leg of a knit stitch here, and I just pull it through. You can continue up as long as you'd like, but basically you just snip it at the end. I'll show you. And then snip it, and you can pull it. So then you can continue weaving in the ends. Unfortunately, there are a lot of ends with this because you've seamed the shoulders and stuff. So go back through and weave in your ends. I'm going to just talk you through how to attach the zipper. I'm not going to go through step by step. There's other videos out there on YouTube. But basically, you're going to want to get a zipper that's about the same length or shorter. Do not go longer. So I'm not thrilled about this color zipper, but this is what I got. Make sure you buy a zipper that separates at the bottom. Some of them are non-separating. So basically what you're gonna wanna do is take some pins and pin the work on the bottom at the top first, and then pin in the middle. And then you're just gonna take a needle and thread and sew up the zipper on both sides. So if you wanna add a zipper, that's just kind of how to do it at a high level, all right?